Hi, and welcome to Dopamine and Doubt. I'm your host, Rachel, a licensed clinical social worker specializing in ADHD and OCD. On this show, I will be speaking from both my clinical and lived experience as we explore the surprisingly common crossover of ADHD and OCD. Because when we understand which is in the driver's seat, we are better able to know what we need in that moment. Whether you're living right at the intersection of both or navigate life with one of these neurotypes, you're welcome here. As always, please take what is helpful and leave what isn't. Neurodivergence shows up differently for everyone, and there is no one-size-fits-all approach. Okay, let's dive in. A few of my friends were over recently, and the conversation turned to ADHD. Someone joked that every woman has ADHD these days, and it got me thinking of how so many of us recognize ourselves in both ADHD and OCD content online. And honestly, I get it. Most people will recognize themselves in some ADHD or OCD traits, and that's because these traits exist on a spectrum. There are a lot of traits that are incredibly relatable, but as a therapist, I also know there's a really important distinction. What makes something a disorder isn't having the trait. It's having the pattern, the frequency, the impact, and how it interferes with our daily lives. Have you ever watched an ADHD reel and thought, wait, but I do that too? Or heard someone say, everyone's a little ADHD, or I'm so OCD. Today, I want to talk about why so many of us recognize pieces of ourselves in these disorders and why that's not the whole story. This is because I just want to normalize. Everyone procrastinates. Everyone loses their keys. Everyone worries. Everyone checks things twice. Everyone has intrusive thoughts sometimes. None of these by themselves mean someone has ADHD or OCD. The difference is the pattern. Diagnosis is not based on one trait. It's based on the pattern over time. So that means patterns across situations, time, relationships, work, and home. And patterns that cause meaningful impairment or distress. So an example, everyone gets sad, but depression is more than sadness. Many of the experiences involved in OCD, like worry, doubt, or checking, can also show up in people without OCD or in other anxiety conditions. The difference isn't simply whether they happen, it's how often they happen. It's how often or persistent they are, the role they play in their life, and whether they become part of the OC cycle. Everyone also gets mentally overloaded sometimes. ADHD involves a broader pattern of executive functioning differences that show up consistently across many areas of life and are often throughout a person's lifespan and are across a person's lifespan. So why does social media make this hard? And for the record, I am not against social media by any means, but I also think we have to understand that social media rewards relatable content, short videos, common behaviors, and videos are simplified. They can leave out impairment and context because reality is much messier than a 2-minute video. So asking ourselves, instead of, oh, do I do this? Or just noticing, well, I do that. Does that mean I have ADHD or OCD? We can ask ourselves, how often is it happening? Since when did it start? Across how many settings is it showing up? And how much is it interfering with my day-to-day life? Is this an isolated trait or a lifelong pattern? If you can relate to OCD or ADHD content, that doesn't automatically mean you have a disorder. And it also doesn't mean your struggles are not real. Maybe you have ADHD. Maybe you have anxiety. Maybe you're under chronic stress. Maybe it's a combination of things. The point isn't to win a diagnostic label. The point is to understand what is happening so that you can get the right support for you. And truthfully, one thing I want to acknowledge about this podcast is that my conversations on here are necessarily simplified. ADHD, OCD, and anxiety are all incredibly nuanced. And my goal is not to cover every exception. It's to give you a framework that helps make these experiences a little easier to understand and to know that you're not alone. If I OCD win, then that fear of not getting all of the nuance would be a reason this podcast didn't exist. So just recognizing that there is a place for oversimplification, and there's also real criteria for meeting diagnoses. This podcast is for educational and informational purposes only and does not replace professional mental health care. If you are struggling, please reach out to a qualified mental health provider who can work with you directly. What I share here comes from my clinical experience and my own journey, but your situation is unique to you. If you are in crisis, please contact 988 or go to your nearest emergency room. Thanks for being here.